I want to welcome everyone to the press conference this afternoon. I want to thank you all for coming on such short notice. The purpose of the press conference is to announce that we received the report from EY entitled Project Future, Creating a Sustainable Future for the Cayman Islands. It's been a report that's been talked about a lot in recent months and has been anxiously awaited. Yesterday afternoon, EY made a presentation to the caucus of the Cayman Islands government and took us through the key areas and suggestions and proposals and recommendations contained in the report. Obviously, for those of you who may have seen it, by this point it should be up on the website. It is a thickish document, and it is going to take Cabinet some time to carefully consider the proposals and recommendations and come to decisions about what we can accept and what we might want to modify, and probably just as importantly, which elements of it we are able to action quickly. So today's discussion really isn't about what is the government's position with respect to this recommendation or that, but is really our attempt, in the interest of transparency, to let the media and the public generally have access to the report at the very start of this exercise, and to be able to, and I'll leave the Deputy Governor to do that, be able to speak to how we think we'll go about the implementation process over the course of the next, what is likely to be a number of years. So I just want to take this opportunity to thank EY for the tremendous work that they have done, Dan Scott and his team. I want to thank the Deputy Governor for his vision in starting this process and his leadership of the project, and all of the other members of his team who have worked so hard to get us to this point. I think this is a real good example of the elected government and the official government working together in a common cause to deliver what we believe is the best we can for the Cayman Islands, and to use the title of the report, Creating a Sustainable Future for the Cayman Islands. So Deputy Governor, I ask you now to say a few words before I call on Mr. Scott to offer some observations as well.
Thank you very much, Premier, and good afternoon to everyone. First, let me start by thanking, as the Premier has done, but I would like to thank him as well for his leadership and commitment. Without his support, we would not be where we are today, and the rest of the elected government, especially Councillor Connolly, who served on the steering committee and of the project. Many people have been involved in this project, so I want to thank all the civil servants who got involved and met with EY, put forward their suggestions, and we had a very energetic group of civil servants who worked on this almost on a daily basis, making sure that EY had all of the access to information that they needed in order to prepare the report. We have received the report. It's, as the Premier said, it's biggish, and it's over 200 pages, so it's a lot for us to digest. It is far-reaching. It covers almost all aspects of the public service. It recommends a number of options, not just privatization, but it talks about amalgamation, outsourcing, public-private partnerships, a number of different things that we will have to consider along with the government. So what's next for us in the civil service? Once the Cabinet agrees, or I should say accepts recommendations, we will then go forward and implement those recommendations. What we have asked our elected leaders to do for us is to look at the report, give us the steer in terms of what recommendations they want us to implement, and give us their priorities as well, because obviously they will have their own set of priorities as to what recommendations should move forward. There'll be a number of quick wins, of course, but again, we want to ensure that we are meeting the objectives of the elected government. So in terms of implementation, you would have read that we have appointed Ms. Mary Rodriguez, and I want to thank her for agreeing to take up this new post of Chief Advisor for Strategic Reforms. That is very important in that for the very first time that I'm aware of, we actually have a unit in government that is responsible for the implementation of a report like this. I think that has been one of our shortcomings, is that we've had various reports, we've given them to chief officers and other persons and said, as part of your job, please go ahead and carry this out. But we didn't have any oversight and coordination to make sure some of these things happen. So Ms. Rodriguez is busy now, getting her team together, looking at what needs to be done in terms of having proper oversight, giving the project a sense of urgency so that we can move forward, and to ensure that we are open and transparent about what we do in terms of implementation. The unit will have a page on my website, and you will be able to access information there in terms of what's going on, where we are with the recommendations, what's happening. There will be no need for FOIs to say, what are you doing about the sale of a particular entity, or what are you doing about an amalgamation of another entity. It will be there. We want to set the standard in openness in relation to this unit. So I'm very excited about this opportunity. It is an opportunity for us in the civil service, to deliver on the mandate of the government, and we're excited about doing that, and I very much look forward to this opportunity. Thank you.
Mr. Scott.
Thank you, Honourable Premier and Honourable Deputy Governor. Let me just start by saying, from E&Y's standpoint, this was a project, as I said, I think at the initial press conference that we were involved in, we were quite excited about working with. Having said that, as with anything, you start the process and then you determine what the outcome will be as to how cooperative people were. I must say, and it has been absolutely outstanding, starting with the Honourable Premier and the Deputy Governor, Chief Officers, the Civil Service, the Civil Service Association. Everybody has come to the table and done so with a great deal of energy. So from our standpoint, we got a lot of good information, and to the steering committee and those who were even more intimately involved, as was said earlier, on a daily basis, we really do want to just thank everybody for their openness. Not that necessarily they will agree with every single recommendation that is in there, but by and large, what we found was that people are really keen to make a difference. So I did want to just, at the beginning, say a big thank you for everybody on that, within the civil service as well as from the political arm as well. One of the things we were asked to do when we came in was to leave no stone unturned, to look at everything possible, and indeed I think we've made a pretty good run at that, and I think that's telling from the 240-odd plus page report that you will have a chance to, each of you would read, and I think the government has decided and has released that now, I think, on their website. The one thing I would ask is that as you read it in its entirety. Be mindful, as with anything, as Cabinet has to consider it, they're going to need to make choices on the implementation, but there is not necessarily one quick fix, and when you do read it, just, as I said, read it in its entirety. Don't seek to just pick out one section without seeing the rest, because it is very comprehensive and there's a lot of information in there. One of the things as we went through this process that we did know, there is success. When you look at the budget of the Cayman Islands and the fact that we now are in a fortunate position that we do have and we do enjoy a surplus, quite honestly, that is something that we should celebrate. But at the same time, I'm pleased to see that the government of the day also recognizes that now is the time, when you are in a position of strength like that, to take the opportunity to make sure that you're also building for the future. And indeed, when you look out at a number of the infrastructure projects that you've heard them speak of and others have spoken of, it is important that we go through this process and look at where and how at this time that we can be more efficient as a country, as a government, and build, indeed, build for the future. As we do this, on the one hand, those of us in the private sector look to government to make sure that services are delivered for us. But quite honestly, the other side of it is we in the private sector also need to be realistic about having to pay a fair fee for those services that are delivered. I said to someone just yesterday, when I graduated from high school, and that was not too long ago because I'm not as old as I look, we had then a population of less than 17,000 people. Today we are, by all counts, approaching 60,000. So when you put that in context as to what a government has had to do to build infrastructure on the fly to support the private sector, you can understand why, again, they may not have had the best opportunity to plan where it is. But I am pleased that they have the opportunity to take pause and say, what should it be going forward? And, you know, we are hopeful that us playing a part in that can make a great deal of difference for Cayman as a country and for the people who call this home. So that I'll pause.
Thank you, Dan. And I think now we're prepared to take questions. Carsley?
Yeah, you got this biggish document. So any idea when Cabinet might have those recommendations for Ms. Rodriguez to deal with?
Well, it's going to happen in phases and steps. We're not going to sit down and wait until we've reached the end of the document and said, well, we've considered every single proposal, and this is what we're going to do with respect to each of them. The team at EY have identified what they believe are quick wins, matters that we can get moving, assuming we accept those recommendations, we can get moving on fairly swiftly. And I would believe that that's what we'll turn our attention to first, because we are as anxious as anyone else to give the assurance that we're actually going to move on this report and it's not going to suffer the fate of its predecessors.
Afternoon, gentlemen. Wendy from CNS. Can you give us an idea of what some of those quick wins might be?
Since Dan is more familiar with the report than me, I'll let him do that.
Yeah, and again, that's one of the reasons why I'm mindful. I do think there are a number of them in there, and I would encourage if you, it's laid out actually quite nicely in the report. So not to shortcut it, but I wouldn't want to try and prioritize them without you having a full read and understanding the context of them. So indeed, I encourage, and I think hopefully the report, if it's not up there on the website, it should be. I believe the intention was that it would be there very shortly.
Yeah, it was supposed to be there at 2:45 in advance, just in advance of this conference. But I think I'm getting indications from nods of head that maybe it isn't there yet.
Gentlemen, just I'm sort of at a loss trying to whip through this quickly and ask some questions. But so forgive me if I've gotten anything wrong in asking these things. But is one of the recommendations in this report that the government should outsource all of its medical operations and privatize Cineco? And if so, is that a quick win, or is that something that's going to take more time to do?
Yeah.
I think within the context of the report, and it's spelled out there, there are options and a process that is suggested. And in the case from memory, if we talk about Cineco as an example, I think there were some options laid out as a pathway and some possibilities put forward. So I don't think it necessarily concluded on one or the other, but it certainly did lay out various options and possibilities. So again, without it in front of me, because when we look at the number of recommendations and the number of areas we looked at, a 240-odd page report, that's why, again, I'm encouraging people to have a read of it, and then perhaps once you've had a read of it, we can revisit and have other conversations around the detail. But on the question of privatization for health services and whatnot, there is certainly, from recollection in there, that is one of the possibilities, is to look at possible outsourcing.
Without, as I said, the report was just presented to us yesterday evening, so I don't have a real grasp of the recommendations. But this I say from experience, and I think no one will be surprised by this. I wouldn't view issues relating to health care and health insurance as easy matters to grapple with or necessarily quick wins. But there are critical areas which absolutely do have to be addressed. And some form of privatization or public-private partnerships, I think, is going to be key to being able to manage healthcare costs going forward for the country, as government is expected increasingly to take up a bigger and bigger share of those costs for those who can't afford healthcare.
Sorry, just if I could one follow-up. I mean, is the bottom line of this, if somebody could help me out here, is the bottom line of this that civil servants are going to have to pay some healthcare premiums? Is that what we're going for here, or is that an option that's being considered?
I don't know how you make that leap, but we haven't considered any of that yet.
Sorry, gentlemen, it's a bit difficult without the report to actually ask you questions. But obviously, you're ahead of us, except for Brent, who obviously has it. You're ahead of the rest of us in that you have heard what's in this report last night. Mr. Scott presented to the court. There must be something that's jumped out at you that you thought, yes, we would have wanted to do that anyway as part of the PPM policy. Let's get going with that. Because if I remember rightly, when you all said this, we had the press briefing about this initiative beginning, you said it was going to be an ongoing issue. We weren't going to wait to the report necessarily to get these things done. So there must be some things that you've seen already. I don't know, for example, the privatization of Radio Cayman, or the merging of the ICO and the OCC, things like that. Can you give us something that we can write?
Well, when I really tried at the start of the conference to head off that sort of question by saying that caucus has taken no decisions with respect to this. I chair a 12-person caucus. I don't get to make decisions on my own, as I think should be readily apparent from my track record over the course of the past 14 months. Even if I decide something or I want something to be the case, I still have to persuade the majority of the caucus that that's the way to go. So I'm not going to go out on a limb at this press conference to try to say what it is we will or will not do. The purpose of the conference was to announce that we received the report, to release the report, and to give general comments about the process and how we propose to deal with implementation going forward. Not to delve into what matters in the report we are going to accept or not accept.
Again, it's difficult to ask questions without seeing the report itself, but I need to ask, in the interest of openness and transparency, will you release the report in its entirety? Has anything been left out of what the public will be seeing once it is published on the website?
No, the report you get is the report we got.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And
Everything.
when you set up the working group to look at how this is going to be implemented, what you're going to be implementing first, will it include members of the private sector? For example, maybe E&Y or the like? Well,
the private sector or some elements of the private sector were involved in all of this discussion. The process now is for the government to decide which of the recommendations it is going to accept in one form or the other, modified or not modified, and then to move forward with implementation. I do see a role for advisors and advice and so forth in how we go about the implementation process down the road, but the decisions about what recommendations to be accepted or not accepted are really a matter for the caucus.
And how long is that going to take? How long is it going to take caucus to decide where you go?
Well, it's a 240-page report, and it covers all aspects of the public service. So, as I said, we're not going to wait until we've reached the end of the report before we take decisions about where we go. We're going to examine, starting immediately, the areas that have been identified as quick wins, possible quick wins by EY, and see what our position is with respect to those, and then act as swiftly as we possibly can on those. So the way
Giving yourself a deadline, though,
a deadline for what?
to have some kind of ideas to when you take the next step.
Well, the next step is to sit down and look at the report.
After that, I mean, after looking at it.
I can't really respond to that question, because it's like, how long is a piece of string? You know, we have to consider the report, and we have to decide initially what elements of it we can accept, what recommendations we're going to move forward on. As soon as we are at that point, we'll make announcements that the government has decided, as an example, to amalgamate this entity and that entity, and it has put together a team, you know, which will be headed up by Mrs. Rodriguez, to ensure the implementation of those recommendations. And while I know members of the media may feel that they are at a disadvantage because they don't have the report, they really aren't, because we are not in a position, and I said that at the start, to at this point delve into the report and to tell you what we think about it. That was not the intent of this press conference. I wanted the media to have the report as quickly as possible after we got it. We got it at 4 o'clock yesterday evening. So we're just giving it to you, and the purpose of this press conference is to announce that that's what we're doing and to tell you a little bit about the process so far, not to talk about what recommendations we're going to accept or not accept. That'll come in due course.
I look forward to reading the report. And this question is for Mr. Scott. In your presentation, you mentioned levels of success. Can you give an indication, based on your recommendations, what level of success the government should achieve if they were to implement your recommendations in reducing the budget?
In reducing their budget.
The budget, yes, overall expenditure. And the idea is to sort of reduce overall expenditure for the government by implementing some of these recommendations. They have an indication as to what level of success would be achieved at that if they were to be implemented.
Well, I think a couple things, and as part of our report and what we got asked to do was really to look not just in terms of sheer cost reduction, but also in terms of efficiency and efficient delivery of service. So what we have not attempted to do was simply just focus it in on strictly a cost-cutting exercise. And part of this as well also gets driven by the decisions that the government of the day deem are appropriate to make. So even with that, it is for them, as they make some of these decisions and on execution and how they execute, will also drive how efficient it will be, one, and what the cost reductions are. So we've not sought to summarize that. The other thing I would just note here is that when you think about this, it is going to be complex and it will be time consuming, regardless of what parts of this report the government and the time that they choose to implement. And indeed, when you look at it, it has sort of a roadmap that we've laid out. But bear in mind, some of these things through the roadmap is simply just to do the analysis and get it started. The other thing I think that's noteworthy is part of this process, in particular where you're seeking to engage the private sector in anything commercial, will also mean that government will need to be negotiating. And in some cases, during those negotiations, in the time of negotiation, they do not want to necessarily be showing their hand. So I would encourage to also understand that part of it as they go through, because what you want is for government to be able to get the best deal possible, right? Subsequently, there's transparency. So it is a process, it is complicated, and that's why, again, I applaud the government with saying, here's the report, so persons do have the opportunity to read it, delve in it, look at all aspects.
Sorry to be a pain in the and press the issue.
You're not sorry at all, Wendy.
But no, actually, I'm not. I'm going to press the issue. You are an elected government. You have policies. You've seen the document, and I don't doubt for 1 minute that you haven't given it a good read already. Having gotten it at 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon, I'm sure you have read a good chunk of it. You were You have certain policies and beliefs. There must be things that have jumped out at you that you know you want to do, and stuff that you know you're not going to do. And Mr. Scott, I'd also like to ask you, when you were going through this process, what were the things that were obvious to you that needed to be addressed?
Yeah. I think the things that were obvious, not only to us, but indeed I think to the DG, civil service, and others, was that we could be more efficient than we have been. And indeed, there were things that could be done, and we got comments earlier about quick wins that could make us far more efficient, more effective. And some of them, quite honestly, it was quite easy wins. They were within the civil service. People were saying, we should be doing this, and it simply had never been done because no one had taken pause and listened to the people who were having to execute on these services. So that was one of the things I think was, for us, as we got in there, it was quite obvious to a number of people who would say it had been obvious for a number of years, but they just never got around to doing some of those sort of simple things and quick wins. So as a single item, I think that was probably one that I think was quite noteworthy and quite telling as we went through the process.
It wasn't a question, it was a statement by you.
No, I was asking you, you read it, there must have been some was there not anything in there? There was nothing in the report that you've seen so far that jumps out at you as a policy that matches where the PPM stands, or absolutely doesn't match where the PPM stands?
Well, without, as I said, I'm not, despite provocation, I'm not going to get into specifics because I don't get to make those policy decisions by myself. The report has a range of things. It proposes sale of certain government assets. It proposes the amalgamation of certain government entities. It proposes doing away with the services the government currently provides. We've said, as a government, we've said for a long time, is that we've got to improve the efficiency of government. As Dan said, this exercise isn't just about cost cutting. It is about the constant pressure, about dealing with the constant pressure on government, whoever the government is, to provide more and more services. And how best can these services be provided? So really, from my perspective, it's not so much about driving down what operational costs of government are, but containing those costs and being able to provide more efficient, more effective, and in some cases, greater services to the general public without constantly having to drive up the government budget.
Okay, this will be my last question down this alley. You say that you are not in a position at this point as to what could be implemented. Are you prepared to say what you're not willing to do? Can you say anything to that effect?
We are not prepared to make decisions, particularly as it relates to the sale of government assets, which we do not believe it will be in the long-term best interest of Cayman, just to get cold, hard cash right now to deal with a particular problem.
And that's as specific as you're going to get about that.
Exactly.
Along the same vein as the private sector being involved in the implementation process, is the FCO involved in any fashion?
In this process?
Mm-hmm.
No, we'll send them a copy of the report. And I'm sure they'll be very, very interested because they're overall concerned about the business of government. And as you know, have had a very close rein on government expenditure and government budget over the course of the last 4 or 5 years. So a matter like this is going to be of great interest to them.
This is my final question for the Deputy Governor.
Yes, sir.
I've had some feedback from civil servants regarding their concerns of what will happen. Is this a axe cutting or is it cutting arm? Have you received a sense of that similar concern from your civil servants?
Yes, I have. We've heard that. And I wrote to the civil service today a few minutes ago before we came here, to let them know that both the elected government and I care about them, and we are going to do everything we can to ensure that they are treated fairly, and any concerns they have are viewed seriously and properly addressed. We are not into the business of just cutting people out of the door tomorrow. That's not what this report is all about. And we want to assure civil servants that we are going to do everything possible to look after their welfare.
I just have one last also for the Deputy Governor, Mr. Manderson. I don't want to sound like I'm beating you up on this,
Okay.
and certainly not disparaging Mrs. Rodriguez in any way, but do you think that when you're implementing this report and whatever the recommendations it does concern, I presume there will be some job losses, there will be some amalgamations, as the Premier said, and other steps taken. Do you think a civil servant, any civil servant, is the best person to implement these changes? Because if I were Ms. Rodriguez, I might say, geez, I'm going to have to lay off my friends and the people I've worked with for 20, 30 years and da-da-da-da-da. I mean, is that the best choice in this? And if it is, why?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't know who else could do it. We, as civil servants, have to carry out the government's mandate. That is our job, whether we agree with it or not. There's been broad agreement on this whole exercise by the elected government, myself, chief officers, everyone. So I don't anticipate any issues in relation to implementation. Will it be difficult? Yes. Mr. Scott has talked about how complex some of the recommendations are, and we will take some time. But let me just pause and just to say for a minute is that while we have Ms. Rodriguez as the overall head of this exercise in terms of the office has been set up, individual chief officers will have the responsibility to carry out the recommendations. So for example, if there's a recommendation that affects waste management, certainly the chief officer that has responsible for that area is going to be the one to do the work on that. Now, they may need some outside expertise. They may need to bring in some help, and that's something that we will have to consider. Ms. Rodriguez's role is to just sort of oversee that, guide it, give the project a sense of urgency, and to alert the Premier and myself if there are roadblocks for implementation, so that we can deal with it, and to ensure that the public is well informed as to what's happening as well. But to answer your question, it can only be civil servants that do this, and I'm very, very confident that we will make it happen.
This one's a little easier. The foreign, you mentioned the Foreign and Commonwealth Office being interested. Obviously, if there's going to be sales or amalgamations or any kind of partnership with the private sector, it will presumably have to follow the FFR now as part of the Public Management Finance Law. Do you see some long roads ahead in that respect if you're going to have to go through that process, given what we now know to be what can be a long road to selling things off?
Well, actually, I don't know how much, and we'll have to consider this carefully, how much of a challenge the FFR will really be to any of this, because this is sort of the other end of the spectrum. This isn't government going out to obtain a contract to do something or to build something. This is government getting rid of services that it once provided, which it thinks may well be better, more efficiently provided by the private sector. So we'll have to look at all that carefully, but I really don't, instinctively, I don't think the FFR is really going to have great reach with respect to this particular exercise.
Any more questions, guys? Anybody prepared for closing?
Let's make sure, because I get beat up as soon as we finish. Say, I just had one more question, but so-and-so wouldn't let me say it. Everybody's okay? Well, I know obviously some of you are disappointed that we weren't able to delve into the detail of the report. As I said, that was never the purpose of this press conference, but I do give you the assurance that as soon as we have made any real progress and have taken decisions with respect to the recommendations, we'll have another of these and be happy to announce to you and to the public where the government is going with respect to this report. We have invested collectively far too much in this, including our own credibility, for us to let this just go the way of so many other reports. So we will be striving to give the necessary assurances to the public that we haven't wasted this money, we haven't wasted this time, and this has not just been an exercise in political posturing or worse, you know, to try to take off some of the pressure off. We are determined to make a real difference to the operational structure of government and the overall cost of running government, because we recognize that if we don't do so, the problem is just going to get worse and worse and worse, and the percentage of government revenue that is required to run the machinery of government is at some point going to become so overwhelming that we're going to go the way of other countries that have failed to address this issue. Many of the services the government currently provides, we believe, can be more efficiently performed by the private sector or by some amalgamation of, you know, some public-private arrangement. And you know, it's really with that, against that sort of backdrop, that we are proceeding. I actually believe we'll be able to make some announcements fairly swiftly about the way we're going, and as soon as my caucus has gotten its teeth into this, we'll be able to make some announcements, I believe, probably in the next couple of months or so. So I want to thank you all again for coming on such short notice, and I apologize that the report wasn't available at 2:45. I hope it's up on the website now. If not, we'll take steps to make sure that you have it as swiftly as possible. Thank you all again.